crazy world. That word keeps coming up. Life is crazy. This is where we need to be. Joe Barnett mentioned that in the story of David and Goliath in 1 Samuel 17, twice David addresses Goliath, said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And then he said, "I come against you, Goliath, in the name of the Lord Almighty." So he used Goliath's name. He addressed Goliath twice. He addressed God and used his name 9 times. And that's where our focus needs to be. With our enemies, with COVID, our personal challenges, we need to be focusing on God. So I'm very thankful for this series. My lesson was meant to be, as Janda said, kind of a summary lesson. And I guess in a way it still is, because every time I speak in this class, I know that I am reminding you of things you already know. But I hope today we can think together, pray together, and grow together. A.W. Tozer, which is what our study is coming from primarily, asked us to consider first today's Christianity. And when he says today, he wrote this book about 15 years ago, and he's referencing about 50 years. So it is relevant. I mean, of course, the perfectness of God is relevant, but what he's talking about in the beginning, we have to ask ourselves some questions. But he wants us to focus on gospel Christianity, not liberalism or modernism, but taking the gospel to people. And he wants us to look at what he felt like were gains and losses in his period of time. And again, we can kind of look at that where we are. He said there's a higher percentage of people attending church. That was, I'm sure, true then. It's not true right now. Yeah, I'm not sure it would be true even if there wasn't COVID. But with COVID, we know it's not true. There's a higher percentage of people calling themselves Christians. I don't know if I would agree that is present today or not, but when he was writing it, he felt like there was. Theological institutions are on the increase. I don't know about that either in our present time. I would say probably not. He also mentions there's more Christian literature, and I might go for that. I mean, I think there are competent, scholarly people that are using our technology and all our innovations to put information out there, spiritual information. And he also says that at his time, religion is popular. What would you say?
50 years ago, yes.
I would say it's not. It's not. We have so much technology, and we do use it for spreading the gospel. We have better communication, but what are we communicating? The author points out that transportation advances in organizations promote evangelism, and I think that's true. But still, we're not focused. And so he moves on into the losses, what he perceives as the losses, and I agree wholeheartedly. He said the main loss that he saw then, and I think it has just grown, is religious fear is replaced by flippancy and familiarity toward God. There's no awareness of the invisible and the eternal. Sometimes when we face death or a loved one faces death, we do come to grips with that. But overall, We just don't have the concept of the divine presence and the concept of majesty. We have lots of organization, but loss of God's majesty. In our movement toward the common man, I think we have created, and I use the term we loosely, a common God that we just, if we mention it all, we just mention maybe even in a joke or, you know, some other way that doesn't show his majesty. Tozer also says we don't have any heroes at that time. Everyone is equal and everyone should have control. I vote for that for now. It's grown, you know, with the riots and all that is happening during this year, the election. Everybody thinks what they believe, and they should be in control. There is no higher being that is perfect. We've replaced majesty with showmanship and sex. And this trend has a definite bearing on our children and grandchildren. My brother works with adolescents, really birth to 17 in a psychiatric unit of a hospital. And he said the focus, he sees daily, the focus on the sexual is traumatizing our children. And I think we have to agree that that's where the world's focus is right now. The loss of majesty also involves the loss of worship, true worship and reverence. The Christian has lost his ability, this is quoting from Tozer, to withdraw inwardly and commune in a secret place with God in the shrine of his own hidden spirit. He's added numbers in some instances. I'm not so sure of that, but he's lost the fear of God. We must see the awful perfection of God. And when I say awful, I mean AWE-FULL. We have to recapture the concept of the perfectness of God and see how, again, how much majesty he is due. Jeremiah 2:19 says, "Consider then and realize how evil and bitter it is for you when you forsake the Lord your God and have no awe of me, declares the Lord Almighty." We just need to recapture his majesty until the awareness of the divine is back, until we have regained the ability and the desire to retire within our own hearts and worship God in the silence of our own hearts. It's rare to hear about God, the Holy One, in the world. Certainly not at Greenlawn, but in our society. If you think about it, that's not the conversation that you hear every day among people that aren't connected to him. And Tozer reminds us the Lord is coming back. His word speaks plainly of our brief life on earth and eternity. The world acts like that this isn't true. But you know, maybe they think about it when a loved one dies or when they have a terminal illness. But the word says he will break through the clouds and show himself majestic and wonderful in heaven above and earth below and under the sea. We will bow and own him as Lord and King. Would it be great to focus on that prior to that dramatic hour of having to focus on it and to be telling people about it before they encounter that themselves? So now let's look at this word perfect or perfection. It's almost become another byword. If someone serves you something in a restaurant and asks you, is this okay? Perfect. Or if someone does a job for you, perfect. Or just, you can probably think of a lot of different situations, and I just hear the word a lot, perfect. Webster says it's the highest possible degree of excellence. If something or someone is perfect, it or they lack nothing that they should have and has nothing that they shouldn't have. It's fullness and completeness. And I think an element of that is right. But as we'll see, that definition doesn't really apply to God. Perfection is found in the Bible very often because the English translation of a number of Hebrew and Greek words that mean that which is excellent, that which is the highest possible degree of excellence. We look at nature. One of the first things, if you have a new baby that comes into your life, one of the first things the mom does is check that baby out. Two arms, 2 legs, 2 feet, 2 eyes. And if she finds all the body parts, she probably will say, thank you, God. Thank you for this healthy, perfect baby. But it's perfect for a human, or he or she is perfect for a human. But if we're on a farm and a little colt is born and he's looked over by the farmer, he doesn't look for the same things. If he looks for 4 legs instead of 2, and if there are only 2, there's a deformity. Perfection is having just what it should have, being what it is, completeness, and fullness of what you are. That doesn't apply to God. How can we apply the highest possible to what we know of God? Is there anything that isn't possible with God? He wasn't created, and he doesn't meet the standard. That only applies to creatures that he created. There aren't any degrees in God. He's completely different and completely separate. He's simply God. Infinite perfection of fullness. Not a little more or a little less. More or less are our words, aren't they? Creature words. They don't apply to God when we say someone has a little more strength today than he did yesterday, or she's a little taller, speaking of a child, than she was yesterday. Those are creature words, creature applications. As Gilda pointed out in her lesson on God's infinite quality, if just a trace or a lack of the quality is present, perfection is absent. So we can't really use the word excellence to compare to perfection when we're talking about God. Excellence means to be a state of excelling, which is a comparison to something or someone. He's a better musician than another, or a better artist, or a better cook, but not perfect. Isaiah 40:25 says, to whom then will you liken me? Or shall I be equal? Don't compare God, because God stands alone as God, and nothing can be compared to him. When God told the Israelites in Exodus 20:4 not to have any graven images, he wasn't objecting to the art. There was art in the temple. But he was saying, you can't substitute something else as an idol for me. And as I said before, the Bible uses the word perfect throughout and it applies to God and things that aren't God. The Lord's command in Matthew 5:48, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which in heaven is perfect. So there, because of the translation, it's using perfect for man and for God. Because in the Greek, the word is the same. But it uses that word because there isn't another word. You can't find a language that will describe God. So God does the best he can to make himself known to us. God is not limited in himself. He's only limited in us. The inability of God to get through to us is not due to the great God's imperfection, but our imperfection, and he's trying to give the truth. I also use J.D. Bell's book, Attributes of God, in my study, and he defines perfection as immutability, if I can say this, immutability or unchangeableness. In Malachi 3:6, it says God doesn't change. In Hebrews 13:8, Christ Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God's unchangeableness does not preclude a different attitude toward one when he makes a significant spiritual change. God eternally opposes sin and sinners. But when you cease to be a sinner, God's attitude toward you changes, or toward the people that we read of in the Bible. As Malachi said, God doesn't change. And Jeremiah points out it's man who changes, not God. An example is in the book of Jonah, in that story. When the king of Nineveh repented, then God changed his plan. But he didn't change his attitude towards sin. Sometimes there's a seeming change, and Tozer points this out, because they are part of his love and his plan for us. And when you read about law versus grace, you think, oh, okay, well, he changed. No, he didn't change. That was his plan from the beginning. We read that in John 1:17 and Romans 6:14, Colossians 2:14, Ephesians 3:11, and Galatians 3:17 and 25. It talks about God's eternal plan and his salvation through Jesus of man. His unchangeableness is a source of encouragement to us, but it's a fearful thing to those who are incorrigible. It's also a cause of worship for us. In Jeremiah 18:7 through 8, because that says that God's promises are also immutable. So we want to worship a God who is unchangeable. We can count on him. The immutability doesn't undermine our confidence in his perfection. He is always God, always powerful. Only good things come from God. Since he is immutable, perfect, there are no exceptions. The God who is good and the source that is good is consistently good to those who are his own. Romans 8:28 and Romans 5:3-5 and 17. When we apply perfection to God, we mean that he has unqualified fullness and completeness of whatever he has: power, wisdom, knowledge, and holiness. So we say all the time, perfect in referencing things and people and situations. And when I say someone is perfect, like Dewey is a perfect song leader, I mean, well, He does the best he can. But God has all fullness of everything. If it's love, no limit. If it's mercy, no limit. If it's grace, no limit. No measuring of goodness. For instance, if I say God is holy, I mean fully and completely. His holiness, goodness, justice, mercy, love, and grace, all of these things and every attribute of God are all shining, full, uncreated perfection. They are the beauty of the Lord God. We see this so vividly in the Psalms. A.W. Tozer begins his chapter on the completeness or perfection of God with Psalm 52, verse 2. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God hath shined. Zion is referred to the perfection of beauty because God shined out of her. Why was Zion the earthly perfection of beauty? Because that beauty came from the shining God who dwelt between the wings of the cherubim. All things as they move toward God are beautiful. And the reverse is true. They're ugly if they move away from Him. What and who honors God is beautiful. And our theology can be and is here, I think, a beautiful thing because it is the mind reasoning about God, just like we are in this series. It's the mind, and this is a quote, direct quote from Tozer, it is the mind down on its knees in a state of breathless devotion, reasoning about God, or it should be. We don't want theology to become hard or aloof because we lose God. Rather, it should be the study of God. Tozer used the illustration of going to David instead of Plato, to Paul instead of Aristotle. Paul and David celebrated the perfection of God. The perfection of God is our hope. Heaven is a place of supreme beauty. Hell, as we mentioned, is ugliness. And Tozer made this comparison. Said, when you look at heaven versus hell, heaven is an expression of perfection of beauty versus hell, the place of unrelieved, monstrous ugliness because of the lack of perfection. There's moral deformity. The earth, our earth, is halfway between. We know the ugliness and we know the beauty. But we have to decide which one we're going to move toward, which one we're going to seek. He says some worry about the fire of hell. But he said even if that were absent, it would be the ugliest place that we could imagine because God's not there. His beauty is not there. God calls us to Him because of His beauty rather than hell's ugliness. And we need to be calling others to that beauty. We can appreciate it. We can read about it, pull it in, but are we telling the people around us? Are we sharing that beauty? Are we telling the story of Jesus? God came to us that He might cleanse and purify and purge and remake and restore us in order to take us back with Him again to that place which is the perfection of beauty. We can't even describe it, but He, Jesus Christ, is the supreme beauty because the perfection of beauty is based not on external but internal beauty. Tozer says Jesus has supreme beauty, and the stories of him show us that beauty, walking up and down among men in humility, healing the sick, raising the dead, forgiving sinners, and restoration, going to the cross to die for them and for us. Another word we use in conjunction with this is wonderful. But nothing in the world is wonderful. This sounds kind of nitpicky maybe, but we especially use it, I think, with technology and with advancement, earthly advancement. But Isaiah 9:6 says, his name shall be called wonderful. And Tozer urges us to pray, God, raise up men and women who would see the beauty and wonder of the Lord our God and begin to tell it and hold it out to people rather than relief and worldly wisdom. We must revive and restore the majesty, reverence, worship, sense of the presence, and awareness of the divine. We must bring people to follow a Savior so near that he can own them. And we can't really compare this to any earthly things like technology or publicity. It just doesn't measure up. If my concept of God is worthy of God, it can be noble, dignified, reverent, profound, and beautiful. It can bring us to see that we can depend on God, fellowship with him, trust in his word, living by faith. He is more real than the world we see around us. He stands on his promises. He comforts for each day as we enter the craziness of this new day, of this world, and the changes and so many uncertainties of this time. God and Christ are the same. They're perfect, almighty to save. His word is eternal. His word is perfect. It's never out of date. It's never irrelevant. He has provided an incorruptible sacrifice, and that's Jesus. Eternal redemption for all who receive. His kingdom can't be shaken. Hebrews 2:28. He is a God who deals with us consistently with his character and his word. He's our great high priest. In an imperfect world, our fearful world, we look to our perfect God, and we don't have to be afraid. We hope in him and have confidence in him because this world, not in this world, but in God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Isaiah contrasts the changing creation with the unchanging creator. That's an encouragement to me, and I'm sure to you too, that God endures and his faithfulness endures even into dark days. I was able to see some written communication between two friends not too long ago. And as I read it, I thought, that's me. I mean, I'm up here talking to you about something I can't comprehend. I can say the words and I want to, and I'm seeking and I want to pray, but we can't comprehend God. I mean, and maybe that's not how you feel, but I think down at the, might maybe say gut level, it is. You cannot comprehend that love and that mercy and that grace. And I just wanted to read some of this dialogue between these two friends because I related to it, and I thought maybe it would be helpful for you to think about too. One of these was a new Christian and had made drastic changes. And he said to the other, I think I've found God, but he's not enough. And the other person responded, seeking God is truth. I would have quit believing in him long ago if he would have jump-started my imagination. Ask him to reveal himself to you in a way that you need. I don't know what the answer will be, but he says to ask. His word says that the Spirit of God dives into the depths of God and reveals the mysteries of God to us. Ask for those mysteries to be revealed to you. I used to think I had found him. Sometimes I don't think I have. It doesn't say how long one has to seek to find him. It just says seek and you will find. It could be 1 second. It could be 1 hour. It could be a lifetime. If you think you've already found him, will you keep seeking? You wouldn't, would you? When you're getting to know a person, do you know everything about them in the first hour, the first month, the first year? Now apply that to the Creator. You could seek 24/7 for the rest of your life and not even be able to understand the full meaning of his name. He is all and in all and surrounds all. He is the great I am. Don't be scared to let God out of other people's box. You have found who other people think God is, and it's not enough. That's the problem. Keep seeking, keep knocking, keep asking. On my telephone, I get Pathway Evangelism, and maybe some of you do that. It's a little devotional each day by Joe Barnett. And the other day, he had one that said, thank you for being you. And he said he was going into a Hallmark store looking for a card for a friend and wanted to thank them for something in particular that they had done. And he did find one. It said, thank you on the outside, and inside was blank. And he went on to say, it seems to me that sometimes we don't just thank somebody for what they've done, but who they are. And he carried that over to express, we need to express our gratitude to God, not just for all he does, but for all he is. A God of goodness, a God of kindness, a God of compassion, a God of love, a God of righteousness, a God of mercy, and a God of grace. Perfect. And I wanted us to praise him. And so I'd like to read Psalm 100, and then Nora has graciously told me that she would lead the song. You don't want me to. So let's just take these few minutes to praise him together. Psalm 100. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. Like nothing ever seen on earth, who can grasp beautiful beyond description, majesty and throne above. And I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. Holding on to whom all praise is due. I stand